welcome to Drums and Wires. We got Steve Peer from Maine, USA with me, Peter Cook, and we dissect and take apart and amplify and exonerate and amplify classic tracks, ones that you may not have heard of or ones that you may have forgotten. And today, it's a great pleasure to talk about the Police and Synchronicity II. Steve, the Police, a three-piece band, but they make a lot of noise, don't they? And a lot of space, actually. That's what's interesting about a three-piece band. Take us on from sort of the power trio thing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the space in particular, and Synchronicity II. So that means there's a Synchronicity 1 out there as well. But anyway, yeah, the space that the Police create are great, especially in the earlier days or the first couple of albums when they were, influenced by the reggae. Just the nature of reggae created a lot of space. Certainly when you go to the fifth album, and their final studio album of where Synchronicity 2 was a single off of that record, the space gets a little a little crowded in as everybody's doing a little bit more, but they still have the space. But most importantly, I think about that song is they still have their aggression. And this song is super aggressive, very strong backbeat, on the 2 and 4, the vocals are super powerful, no question about it. And I think, again, the song is driven aggressively by Stewart Copeland primarily. I mean, again, the vocals are strong, no question. But Copeland really lays down the 2/4, and he's an absolute groove master. Even though when you watch clips of him live, he's certainly a bit more animated, a bit more aggressive around the drum kit and so forth. But in the studio, and certainly he never loses track of the backbeat. No question about it.
Yeah, there's incredible solidity from Copeland, but also you can tell he's also a great technician as well. He can do these clever things. But you told an interesting story about the only unique thing that he did. Do you want to just relate that to me, the 2-minute thing?
Well, I think what is most interesting about Stewart Copeland and how this manifests itself, I'm not quite certain. Maybe one of our listeners, again, most of our listeners are smarter than us, so maybe they would have some insight. He's a left-handed person who plays a right-handed drum set. So that's got to create something unique. And again, I don't know what that would be, but it's clearly sort of ass backwards, but really works for Stewart, no question about it. And I think an interesting story too about him is he does drum workshops and so forth, where drummers show up and he shows all of his moves and probably plays along to a couple of tracks. He'll often say, "I am going to do something that no other drummer can do." It just silences the room, and he proceeds to play bop, boom, bop, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop. For 2 minutes, he just lays down the simplest groove ever. Essentially saying, the most important thing to do, boys and girls, is to just lay down the beat. You'll get your chance to show off how fast and how articulate you are as a drummer. First things first, lay it down. And he does a great job of doing that.
What for me is interesting in this particular song is there is an awful lot going on, particularly on the live version, where he does show a little more of his skill. But that drum business fills up a lot of the song. There's Andy Summers doing what Andy Summers does. But the interesting thing I've always found about the Police, and you mentioned the reggae thing as well, but all the way through, you watch Sting play and you're just sort of going 1, 2, or just do. He hardly play. I mean, he can play bass very well, jazz bass, all sorts of great things, but he's really just holding the root note down. There isn't, again, that just gives it this great root of solidity. I feel that this particular song, but also a lot of their other material, and a lot of the Police's work is really about obviously the lyric is a different thing altogether and everything else, but the bass and drum is pivotal to the success of their music, I think.
Yeah, I think the rhythm section is key, and I love Andy, no question about it. The guy is like so understated, with his, and you could speak to this perhaps better than I could, and so could some of our listeners. The harmonics, the counter stuff he does. He's not just playing the chords. He's kind of off in his own little world and complementing everything very well. But certainly the rhythm section was what captivated me when I saw them in 1979 at the Nashville in London, not really having any idea who they were. It was just sort of a night out on a town. You know, this cool band that everyone seems to be talking about is at the Nashville. It was an 800-seater. You just walked around the big cavernous hall with your pint, and I just remember certainly getting right up to the stage and looking at Stewart Copeland in his gym shorts and his knee-high socks and his sneakers, you know, looking kind of dorky there, but looking very athletic, certainly suggesting to me that he was an athletic player, and he certainly is and was, and just being blown away certainly by the rhythm section and the way that, you know, he and Sting were just so locked in, and those great songs too from that first record, you know, Roxanne obviously, and you know, Born in the '50s and stuff that, you know, probably most people don't even recognize, but the stuff that was, you know, very punk inspired, reggae inspired, and Sting's voice was very, very unique and still is. So yeah, just from the first moment I saw them, I knew this was a trio to be reckoned with, no question about it.
And then you've got this wonderful sort of lyric that's sort of dystopic in nature and also relates back to the idea of synchronicity, which is not causation, but correlation between things that appear not to be connected. And that, of course, Sting then went off later on for tantric sex and other sort of more spiritual adventures. But I mean, he's always been very interesting lyrically with what he's put together. And the lyrics of this song are really very interesting, of their time, I think, but we haven't seen things like that so much. You know, he went into much more simpler lyrics, but this is a complex lyric as well. And Andy Summers, I think, in the middle of the song does do this kind of wall of sound thing. They said they had to set up several marshals, set up at 11 to get the sort of sound that he wanted in the middle. But also a lot of it is terribly understated, little picking bits, as you say. A lot of Andy Summers' work, it's like sort of you don't sort of notice as it washes over you, but in fact, a bit like Johnny Marr, when you take it to bits, it's really quite hard to play. And that's another sort of interesting thing. So he's doing all these little ornaments and things that aren't just strumming notes and, you know, smashing chords and things. But that, of course, makes the whole thing more delicate and more intricate. I don't know what the lyrics of Synchronicity mean. I don't know if you do, Steve. But I do know there was a bit of synchronicity because we also were going to the Nashville frequently. We've never met at the Nashville or in Nashville, but I used to go and see the Doctors of Madness and all sorts of bands at the Nashville Rooms in London. So who knows, we may have been in the same room. But my recent experience of seeing was seeing Sting. I never did see the Police, actually. And I was just blown away by the sheer musicianship. Just he doesn't. What I noticed about Sting when he plays guitar, he doesn't hit it. He just almost just touches it. It's really quite delicate, his way of playing the bass. I mean, he does put aggression in, but it's almost as if he's probably got it much louder than he needs to have it, so he can just stroke the thing, which is quite interesting for a rock band because a lot of it is sort of like this, really, isn't it? But yeah, a great song.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the video is pretty cute as well. I mean, you know, it's clearly a mid 80s or early, 83 or something when the video came out. And, you know, it's epic. It's big. It was filmed on a sound stage or sound studio, probably somewhere in London. And, you know, 20-foot, 25 feet, 30-foot scaffolds, and they're all set up separately. A very dystopic sort of scene, and paper and litter stuff blowing around. It's the end of the world kind of a look. And I found it a little funny looking back at it, just because I was reminded of like the new romantic movement of the early 80s, you know, Steve Strange and all of his kind of fashion people. And it was just like, that's sort of not like the Police to sort of buy into that. But I think they were really just going more for a raggedy sort of end of the world look, not so much for a new romantic look. But it did sort of remind me a little bit of like an underdressed Spandau Ballet or something. But it's still, the video is like the song, you know, very aggressive, very powerful. Andy sort of comes out of his shell a little bit, and he's doing a little bit of, you know, quasi Peter Townsend windmilling, and Sting's really giving you the evil look, and Copeland's just being Copeland, you know, kind of the the goofy American guy beating the living crap out of the drums, which is just great. So I agree with you. It's a great song. Wonderful kind of conclusion to their studio career, and certainly a powerful song in their live set for anyone who wants to sit through some of those concerts from whenever that was in the early 2000s. They did their final world tour.
So you mentioned the end of the world. In fact, I do recall there's a story about when they made the video. I think 10cc were producing this, and something caught fire while they were actually filming one of these things, and there was a crisis going on, and they told them to keep filming.
Yes, you're right. And I believe it was, and he probably deserved it for being such a snarky guy. I think it was Copeland's tower. And, and drummers do deserve to burn in hell. I mean, let's face it, really. But yeah, I think if I were the filmmaker, I would have taken my chances. All the crew, fingers crossed. Let's just get this and save Stewart. Yeah, but you're right. There was a little malfunction there of some sort, and it worked to their advantage. So look closely at the video, folks.
Of course, this would have never have happened today with health and safety standards and all of that.
Oh my gosh, no, there's no.
But thinking about the end of the world, I think we may have reached the end of the discussion on synchronicity. Am I right? Or is there more to do?
No. The only thing I'd like to add real quick, just because the state of Maine, where I live, we're right up against the province of Quebec in Canada. And a lot of that album that Synchronicity II came off of was done at La Studio in the province of Quebec, which was really almost where the band Rush just kind of lived. They did most of their work there, for example. And all the Canadian bands, it was the studio. And sadly, it burned down and it no longer exists. So there's a little bit of rock history there in regard to recording studios. And it was mastered by Bob Ludwig, who has his studio in Portland, Maine. And I don't care what album you look at. I believe one of every 3 CDs or albums you have, since the 1990s will probably have been mastered by Bob Ludwig. But anyway, yeah, I think we can end it there. Synchronicity II, The Police, fabulous band, powerful trio, wonderful.
So, subscribe to our channel. Tell us what we got wrong. Tell us what we didn't tell you about the Police and Sting and tantric sex even. Perhaps we could have a session on that, but not me and Steve, obviously. So you can write in about that. But in the future, we'll be looking at all sorts of stuff. We've got loads of stuff coming up. Make us some suggestions. So subscribe on the button, please. And this is Drums and Wires.